I'm Steve Fry. I'm here to talk about my time I spent in Vietnam. I was there in 1970. I joined the Army in 1969, trained in Georgia for my basic training, and then trained in Missouri for combat engineering. In February of 1970, they sent me to Vietnam in the Army. And my first assignment over there, I remember the plane ride over there was just full of everybody on their brand new combat fatigues. But we flew in and landed, and that was quite a flight. Smelled like a cattle car, you know, all the time we spent on that plane. Everybody's scared out of their wits. But my first assignment was in Phu Thai, which is, there was a little base, I guess it was little, I don't know, I didn't see much of it. A base on the central coast of Vietnam, and there was a headquarters company there, and my job, I was a private, was to provide security, be part of the security system where we were putting up fence and wire and things of that nature to protect the base, and also doing a lot of guard duty. Little towers sort of surrounded the base, and maybe up in the tower during the day or the night, you know, guarding the base. After a few months of service there, they needed somebody to do some work at an airfield up in An Khê. And the work was to do, as they build the airfield, they have to put down rock and base and sand and things of that nature, and it has to have a certain quality to it, certain sizes of rock and dirt and sand and water, you know, like building a road. And they needed somebody to be able to do the testing. And I had 2 years of college, so they thought I might catch on. So they sent me to a little school down in the Saigon area. I forget where it is. Which base it was. A big, huge American base down there, just tens of thousands of GIs down there. And so I went to a little school where they taught me how to do soils testing. And then they sent me to, after the school, I went up to An Khê. It's a little village, if you will, up in the mountains, the central highlands of Vietnam, and there was a base there for the 4th Army. We were building an airfield up in the mountains for this, for the Army. So I started doing the soils testing out there. They'd crush rock and do things of that nature. So I'd have a little truck and I'd drive over and be part of the building of the airfield. And the airfield was made of steel. They had these big sheets of steel that locked together. So you'd put down the base, and then they'd bring these sheets of steel out and lock them together and flop them down and lock the next group over. So you had this acres and acres of sheets of steel, just flat as it could be, flat as a pancake. And then they started landing planes on it, and the base that we'd built underneath the steel wasn't proper, wasn't built correctly, and so the steel just started warping and bending and going. It was just a big waste. It was just a huge waste of time and money. And I guess they went back and probably rebuilt it, probably doing the same thing, and, you know, wasted another bunch of it. So that's what the war is. It's just can be just like, for the people that are doing it, it can seem just like a terrible, terrible waste of lives and equipment and time and everything else. It's just a horrible waste. So after doing that a while, because I was on temporary duty, I was able to have a little more freedom, and I figured out a way to do the studies where I didn't need to spend a lot of time on it. So I started driving a truck with another soldier, and we would drive from every day. We'd get up in the morning, we'd get in the truck, and we'd drive from An Khê down to Phu Thai with all the mail and orders and papers and things of that nature. We'd drive this little truck down out of the mountains down to the coastline, and drive along the coastline through all these little towns and villages, and where the people are, you know, riding their bicycles and these little motorcycle car kind of things with people hanging on them with the chickens and the pigs and the kids, and we drive through these little towns, one town after another. Never had an incident of anybody attacking us or shooting at us or assaulting us ever. And well, I mean, we did it for months, and we were on a route, and being creatures of habit, we did it the same time of day. I look back, we were sitting ducks if somebody had wanted to, you know, hurt us. So, and then we'd have lunch, and then we'd pick up whatever mail for the whole company, and that was up there, and the orders from the people that gave orders to the company commander, and all that information, we'd bring it back and then have dinner, and then next day we'd do the same thing. So that was kind of a lot of my time over there. And like I was telling you earlier, we didn't have the ability to communicate with people back home except by letters. So we, that was another thing we do. We spent a lot of time writing letters, and you know, wrote my girlfriend at the time. Now she's my wife, been married 37 years, my mom and dad and my sisters, and they would send us letters, and they would send us packages of, you know, things to eat, and that would survive that period of time it took to get it over there. I don't remember how long it would take, a week or two for things to arrive. And then evenings was either guard duty, or it was, you know, just hanging around in these hooches, we called them, which were these frame structures with metal roofs. Our living conditions where we ate in a little mess hall, where they cooked heated canned food for us, basically is what they did. We had latrines, and didn't really, you know, the fresh water arrived in a truck and hung in a bag out behind the barracks, the hooches. We had fresh water in these big canvas bags, and whatever else they had in the little kitchen as well. So it was sort of like camping out, sort of like a permanent camping out. We didn't live in tents, though. We were in these little buildings, but so we were a step above a lot of the guys that were over there.
How long were you there?
I was there from February of '70 to my birthday, December 31st. The war had started to wind down by 1970. It was not as hot, as active as it had been in previous years. So they were actually starting to reduce the number of troops that were in Vietnam. So some of us were able to come back earlier than we otherwise would have been able to come back. So I did a little bit less than a year over there.
Were you enlisted, or did you get drafted?
I enlisted. I joined the Army after a couple of years of college, and, you know, was looking for what to do with my life, if you will, and that seemed like a good way to find myself a little more, and to also serve my country, and also get the benefits of the GI Bill, which was a big deal, and, you know, helped me go back to school and be able to become a lawyer and buy a house, and made a big difference in my life.
Was any part of your family in any war before this one that influenced you to go into the war?
Sure. My dad and one of his brothers actually were both at Pearl Harbor. They were both in the Navy, and both survived. And I had a brother that was in the Army in the early '60s. He served in Germany, in garrison duty in Germany. He was a musician. And then my brother Roger was in the Marines, and he served in Vietnam, and he got 2 Purple Hearts. He was seriously wounded while he was over there.
You mentioned that you lived in buildings there, so it wasn't as bad as some people, but was it pretty tightly packed until the war started winding down, or was it like pretty, like everybody got their own bunk and it wasn't like...
Yes, everybody had their own bunk, and you had your own box, if you will. I forget, foot lockers. So what you'd have, you could put, you know, a few clothes and your toiletries and things of that nature in a foot locker.
Have you ever seen Forrest Gump?
Yes, I saw
Was
Forrest
it
Gump.
in like places like that? Was the places where you stayed, were they like where he stayed?
I don't remember
like,
where he stayed. I'm sorry,
okay.
but they were wood frame buildings with like a corrugated metal roof with sandbag for blast protection around them in the event there was mortar rounds or rocket rounds, so to protect the people that were inside the little buildings. Yeah.
You said that you had guard duty. Was there ever anything you saw that like happen, or was it pretty much just
Pretty calm. We never were, we were never fired on. Actually, my biggest memory of guard duty was one of the towers was near the entrance to the base, and not, about 50 yards away was the bakery. So we were able to sneak down out of the tower and go get a fresh loaf of bread about 4 o'clock in the morning. Freshly baked loaf of bread.
I'm sure that was a little helpful.
That was a little morale boost.
All right. So, like, I know that you weren't, like, in the front lines, like, shooting at the enemy, but were you ever, like, resentful that they caused all this, or, like, were you just, like, you kind of understood that not everybody was there for hurting you and all that?
You mean the Vietnamese?
Yeah.
They caused it? The Vietnamese people were, from my impression from being over there, the ones that in the area where I were at, they were just trying to make a living and get along and raise their families and, have a life. And the imposition of the military was just that. It was a huge, terrifying thing for them. Yeah. But of course, the Vietnamese and some of the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong that lived there as well, and the North Vietnamese that were attacking the South Vietnam, they were very much a part of the problem. That's why you fight wars, sure, absolutely. We had a good reason to be there, I believe, and we thought we did. We weren't successful, but the damage, I can't say that the damage to that country was worth what we did. I mean, it just really destroys people's lives and towns and cultures. It's a terrifying thing.
Did you ever see anything that was like horrifying or anything like you see like in the movies about wars, how there's like battles every day and people giving their lives up? Did you ever see anything horrific like that?
No, I did not. I was very lucky not to have to experience that.
You said that you wrote a lot. Like, did you just write to them saying how, or like your loved ones and stuff, how you miss them, or did you ever like describe your day to make them feel more like they were with you and secure and stuff?
Both. Some you would describe your day and what you did and how it may have gone. Yeah, you try to think of things to write about and things you miss and what you're looking forward to when you're able to get back home. Sure. I went on R&R. I'm sure I wrote about that. My 5 days in Hong Kong. I wrote about those kinds of things. Came home with a ill-fitting suit and shoes that were too tight.
Your brother had gotten 2 Purple Hearts, you said. What exactly was a Purple Heart?
Purple Heart is an award that you receive, a medal that you receive for wounded in combat.
How exactly did he get wounded? Like, was he shot or shot?
One time he was injured from shrapnel from a hand grenade. My brother was one of those guys that was out on the, patrolling and humping in a rifle. He was a real grunt. And the other time he was shot in the neck, and the bullet came out his back as he sort of walked up over a berm, and he was shot by a sniper. He was very lucky to live, very, very lucky.
What did you feel when you were going to Vietnam? Like, what were your feelings? Like, were you scared? Did you pretty much know what you were going into?
I did not know what I was going into, but I had ideas that it would be a very dangerous place, more like the experience my brother had. But my experience was not like that. So yes, there was a lot of fear, if you will, about what's going to happen to me while I'm here. But I wasn't, panicking. But there was a lot of concern about my safety, sure.
When you first got the, I don't know what you would say, like the uniform and stuff like that, like, did it feel more final once it was put on your hands and you were on that plane? Like, it was like, this is what I'm going to be doing?
Yes, That's a good point. Exactly. When you put the combat fatigues on, the brand new green fatigues with the brand new combat boots on, the jungle boots, and you get on that plane and you're on your way, yeah, you know this is a real thing you're going to be living through, that this isn't just training anymore.
Can you talk to us about the loneliness of the war, like how it was and everything?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, is your sense of separation from your family and your town and the people you love and the culture that you live in. You're just estranged from your own world. And loneliness is a really big thing, and I think it helps drive people that are in the military to do kind of crazy things, you know, drug abuse and alcohol and all those kinds of things. It helps people sort of, I think it aids people's addictions, if you will. The loneliness is a big part of it, sure.
Did you meet anybody that you kept in contact with, any of your friends?
Yeah, there was only one, and he and I were friends in Vietnam, and he and I got back together, let's see, we were there in 1970. He had come over from Germany. And he and I got together, I think it was 79, 80. I was living in Palm City then with my wife and a couple of kids. And he came down from New York. He was a New Yorker. And he came down from New York with his girlfriend. And they were both junkies and were shooting up in the bathroom. And wow. We weren't on the same wavelength at all anymore. We had completely different lives at that point. And so but that's the only guy I've ever really stayed in touch with.
It's an interesting experience.
Now, as an engineer, were there any projects that you worked on, like big projects, and then were they dangerous?
The project we were building up in Ankei was like an airfield. Did I talk to that? Yeah, there was the airfield project. That was the biggest project that the company I was with was working on. That was our big job when I was up there. It was not particularly dangerous. It wasn't like anybody was, we weren't like running out there and laying the steel, you know, in between sniper rounds. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that at all. It was just hot and miserable, and when you were done, you didn't go back to, you know, an air-conditioned house and a television. You know, you went back to a hot, miserable hooch, and, you know, hopefully you can get a can of beer that's not too rusty.
Do you regret going? Like, do you think you did everything that you could for, like, Vietnam, and did you think you did your best there? I
did my best, and I don't regret personally going. I don't regret going myself. No, I don't regret that. I question whether the United States belonged there. At the time I went, you know, I didn't question it as much then, but I do question it now much more than when I was there, or even before or shortly after I was there.
I know you said that it was a pretty peaceful part of where you were, but are there any memories that like ever come back to you, like a certain moment that, I don't know, kind of stuck with you even when you left and helped you remember parts of the war?
No, I'd never had like a traumatic experience, you know, a shocking, horrifying, traumatic experience while I was there. But there was certainly there was hardship and difficulty, but nothing. I was 20 years old or whatever, and it wasn't like something that I couldn't overcome or that would cause me permanent, you know, psychological or physical damage at all. I don't feel like.
Did any of your family like try to stop you from enrolling in the war? Like,
yeah,
were they against it?
Yeah, my brother Bill did. My oldest brother, the one that had been in the Army in Germany, he told me I was crazy for going, and why are you doing this? And he thought I shouldn't enlist. You know, he pointed to my brother Roger, who'd gotten back from Vietnam just a couple years before, and you know, it's like an example of why you don't want to go. But I just didn't feel like that. I felt like I wanted to go in the military. It was a good time for me to go, and I'd take whatever chances arose.
you said you had kids. Are any of them going into, or are they old enough to go into?
No, none of them have been joined the military. No,
Oh, okay.
no.
Would you try to convince them not to if they did decide that they wanted to?
No, I would encourage young people that, especially if they don't have a lot of focus in their lives and they're sort of between things, and like I was, I think the military either it causes you to grow up or gives you the time to kind of grow up and get more focused. It was good for me. It was also good for my brother Roger. He came out after being a very poor student in high school and kind of a layabout and, you know, not any direction. And when he got out of the Marine Corps, he was ready to be focused, and he's an architect, a very successful architect now. So, and for me, I had no idea what I was going to be doing when I was in school after a couple of years. I didn't have a lot of direction. And when I got out and I was already married and started raising a family, I had a lot of focus and a lot of ideas about what I needed to be doing. So, no, I recommend it.
So being in the war helped you, like, to help you become more determined and just like help your goals become more focused?
Yeah, it helped. I think it helps you. Focus is a good word. It sort of narrows things down. You know, there aren't. You know, it's time to get involved with your own life and take control of your life and make some decisions and live with them and go on. Not assume that you can just. You've got all the time in the world to do whatever it is you want to do.
Now, you grew up in the time of the 60s. Can you elaborate on what that was like with all the political things going on and then going into the war right after that?
Yeah, the times were getting kind of, the times they were changing, as Bob Dylan said. They were changing. There was a lot of, I was on the campus at the University of Florida, and the campus atmosphere was changing very, very quickly. The fraternity boys were using drugs. And they'd generally been the more conservative types, and there was a lot of music and young people sort of trying to take over the universities, and all those kinds of things were starting to happen then. And it was the academic atmosphere was sort of coming apart. So it was a good time not to be there. I think it was a good time to get out of there from my perspective, because that's not something I would have enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed the music. I was a big Bob Dylan fan and the Beatles and Stones. I loved all that. That was all great. But the chaos and the heavy drug culture, the acid heads and the heroin abuse and the amphetamines and downers and uppers and it was just really, there was a lot of that, and it was not an environment I would thrive in.
What did you do after, like, you got out of the war once you...
Well, let me say, so I joined the Army, and then when I got in the Army, it was a lot like that too. There was a lot of drug abuse and alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
So, you think you're going to be in a different environment, but it wasn't like that. There was, there's a lot of wacky people in the Army too. They're not like you think of them when they're all in their uniforms and marching around, that they're all very, disciplined and, straightforward. And there are some really different characters in the military too, let me tell you. So excuse me.
But, like, what did you do after you got out of the war? Because you said you didn't have, like, anything straightforward on college or anything. What did you do? Did you go back to college?
Yes, I worked for a year with my dad painting houses. He was a house painter down in Fort Lauderdale, and I went to work for him for a year, made a few bucks, saved a few little money, went to the junior college and took some courses, and then we went back to Gainesville. My wife, who I'd met in school, we went back to Gainesville, and I got a degree in journalism, and then I got a law degree too. Thanks to the GI Bill was a huge, huge part of that, and borrowing money on student loans, and that's how we were able to make it happen.
The GI Bill, what exactly is that? Like, what does it do for you?
GI Bill at the time they would write you a check every month if you were in school. If you were a full-time student, they'd write you a check. That's all you needed to do to qualify for the money. If you were a GI, if you've been in the military during the Vietnam War and during the wartime, if you got a check every month for, I think it was 4 years, up to 4 years, and then if you went to grad school, they gave you another year or two for post-graduate work even, so.
If you hadn't had the GI Bill, do you think you still would have had the I'm trying to think of the word, just like the determination to continue like being able to get a job and being successful and being able to pay for all that?
Well, if I hadn't got the GI Bill, I probably would be a house painter in Fort Lauderdale or doing something like that. I don't know that I would have ever achieved completing college and law school. I don't think I'd had, I would not have had the money, and I don't know where I would have gotten it without the GI Bill. Absolutely.
Now, before you went to the Army, what exactly were you doing in college? Were you still trying to figure out what you were doing, or did you have something to go on for?
I had a sort of an idea I wanted to be a lawyer someday, but I had no idea how I'd ever achieve that or what I ought to be studying or anything like that. So no, I didn't have a lot of direction right then.
After the war was over, were you able to put it completely behind you, or did you want to keep some of the memories that you had there with you?
Well, the war's just, I came back before the war was over. The war was still on. I don't know what year was the war over, 73? Something like that. 72, 73. It went on for a couple more years. And everybody came back on their own. We sort of went over on our own, and we came back on our own. We didn't go over as a unit or come back as a unit. When I got back, I still was in the Army, and I became a drill sergeant for a year in Fort Wood again. And in terms of memories and put it behind me, I think I just sort of took an attitude of I'm going to go on with my life. I'm going to try and go on with my life. I mean, I wore a field jacket for a while, even in civilian life, and I had some ideas about. I was proud of my service, and actually I spent a year in the reserves too. But I think I did put it behind me. I haven't dwelled on it. I was able to go on and get my education and raise a family, and I didn't dwell on it. I went on with my life.
Is there anything else you would like to add for us to know?
No.
Maybe we haven't covered.
Excuse me?
Maybe that we haven't covered?
Yeah. No, I think we've pretty well covered it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here and giving us your time.
Thank you very much. I hope it turns out well for you girls.
I'm sure it will.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.